before the scenario that I brought up, and the scenario that you brought up, the example is where the parents are able to have mutual respect for each other, which sounds really great. But there are some high conflict situations I can imagine where, let's say that there's abuse alleged, right, by one parent, or maybe they feel fearful for the safety of themselves and the child. So they're actually fleeing. Like, it's not even just like a choice that they want to, move away. They're actually fleeing that the allegedly abusive spouse. Or sometimes a parent might feel that the other parent's unfit. Not a good role model, for example. Now, in those situations, first of all, is mediation even appropriate? Like, how would you deal with this under a mediation lens? Eva, or do you want to start?
Sure. So, often anything can usually come or try. Anybody can attempt mediation, but often mediation works the best when there are elements of compromise, when both parties can reach a resolution. There are certain cases where there isn't much room for negotiation. One person has to be right? Or one person has to have their position, affirmed.
Mm-hmm.
Those cases are probably better suited for the court system. In areas where there is an allegation of abuse, and I'll talk to Laura about the different ways we can manage higher conflict mobility cases that maybe don't have to do with abuse, but we can talk about higher conflict cases in mediation. But in instances where there is abuse, I think any lawyer would want to communicate that, of course, you want to make sure that your children are safe, but the process in which you go about that is extremely important. And so the law does not want anybody to leave the country or to have to leave the country to keep their child safe, right? That is not the route that anybody should have to go.
Right.
And that's why there can be very serious consequences, even if there is abuse, to someone just picking up and leaving. So certainly someone who is going through those instances or those experiences would want to work with a lawyer that they trust from the get-go before they even leave the home, if possible. Right? Because once you pick up the children and you leave, you move their residence, right, irregardless of the context, there can be very significant legal consequences to that, right? And as you can see, leaving the country and fleeing a country can be considered child abduction, right? Which is why we have a process outside of family law. There's a process to cross the border where you need to have the consent of the other parent in order to just leave the country.
But what if it's not leaving the country? What if a parent abducts a child and goes to another province? Is there a Hague equivalent?
So yes, there's no Hague necessarily, but the provinces recognize each other's authority. Yes, absolutely. And still, the fact that the child was living, let's say in Ontario, that was their primary residence. And also from a children's advocate point of view, the child's home is here, right? They shouldn't have to leave because they are being abused either, right? The child has a right to stay in their home free of any abuse or danger.
Right.
And that's what the law affirms. It's just about how we go about it that is most important. It's so important to follow the correct legal procedure in that case.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right.
Oh, Laura, I'm going to turn this to Laura. I think she's like, I want to say something.
And needless to say, and Eva did touch upon it, that you can always try, families do try mediation, even when there are elements of abuse or power imbalances. So we do have families, but there are other supports that have to be put in place before proceeding with the mediation and during the mediation. Sometimes actually we have to put provisions such as you have to work with a child's voice consultant. So we need a child's voice report that has to be rendered, which will take care of all of the allegations, will manage and will provide some kind of recommendations as to what's in the best interest, including safety of the child. So that will inform the mediator or the mediators as to what path to start discussing to create a parenting plan for the child, or whether the allegation of abuse is just an allegation of abuse for different purposes. So that we do not play the role of investigators. However, we can include investigative mechanisms into the process. Another process before you even jump into court may be considered, depending on the lawyer and the safety. There's a mediation arbitration process, right, that families can enter into. And we've had mediation arbitration processes where just because there is an allegation of abuse, we have to go, even in the mediation phase, we have to introduce elements such as, now you both have to meet with a clinical investigator. Now you both have to meet with whomever. Or you can include in their parenting plan what's called a parenting coordinator. So that parenting coordinator, once you finalize a parenting plan and you sign off on it, so now you have, you know, a legally binding document, that's a separation agreement, included in there. There is a mechanism that takes care of all of this stuff if they surface or resurface during the next phase of their separation. So, for example, a parenting coordinator would be their dispute resolution mechanism, as opposed to other families, majority of families who finalize a mediation, let's say, or even a court proceeding. Sometimes most of the contracts have in there that if there is a dispute, they will go to mediation. But this family would have a different dispute resolution mechanism, which would be the parenting coordinator, which has the ability to make a decision. So if there is an allegation or abuse or anything like that, that parenting coordinator's mandate will include clearly relocation or mobility powers, and then we'll make decisions accordingly, right? So there are still ways to manage the allegations or the abuse, if there is abuse, and also keep the child safe and keep a co-parenting relationship at its optimal functionality.
Going back to this, I know that sometimes things happen. So let's say that, I don't want to do any stereotypes, so let me just phrase this very carefully. Let's say that one parent is under a lot of stress, and they're having a really bad month or whatever it is from work, and they come home and they're throwing their temper around, and the other parent is fearful for their life and the children, so they quickly pack up and leave. Okay, they go back to their own parents, the grandparents' place, and they're staying there temporarily. Would that be abduction? That's one question. Because like you're so fearful for the safety of yourself and the children that there's not going to be, you're not going to think, oh, I'm going to give notice to this person and let them know that I'm planning to leave them in 30 days. So, you can't do that, right? So sometimes things happen, in a flash, and you just have to leave. So you pick up and leave and you go to a temporary shelter. I guess, so first of all, is that bad? Is that abduction? And second of all, can you then engage in mediation? But can you insist that, like, I really don't feel safe staying with my partner right now with my children because he's got, or he or she has this temper issue. So can they stay apart and have a mediation at the same time? So yeah.
No. So I'll handle the first part of the question, and then maybe Laura can talk about shuttle mediation, which we have done before.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So the first part of the question is kind of that scenario, right? Which is, can I leave the home in an instance of danger with the children?
Yeah.
And we always want to try to avoid talking about hypotheticals too often, because oftentimes the law looks at context as opposed to one instance, right? So we look at the context as a whole. So it's hard to say a yes or no, but what I will say is this. If the law is to work perfectly, so if everything is in an ideal scenario, a person would not have to flee with the children, because generally in an instance where there is domestic violence or abuse, when the police are called, the abuser is taken away from the home. Right. For at least a 24-hour, 48-hour period. In that period, what would happen is the survivor of violence would ideally get legal advice from a lawyer, and the lawyer can do a number of things to keep them safe. So they can get a restraining order, which means that the abuser cannot come back for a certain amount of days, right? They can also get an order within the court to say that the survivor has exclusive possession of the home for a certain amount of time, right? So that they can stay in the home without the other person there. So there's a lot of mechanisms that hopefully can be put in place. Of course, I understand the reality is sometimes in a split decision, in danger, someone has to leave. And generally, if they leave, you know, lawyers come in afterward to kind of fix it all up, right? To make sure that the conflict doesn't escalate more. But that would be the ideal scenario, is that the abuser is removed, not the survivors.
Okay, I understand. And Laura,
and sometimes we have had we've had families who were under this tremendous amount of pressure and stress, and they have taken those steps. However, they have come to the realization that they need to work together and not go to court. So we have conducted mediations with, you know, particular strategies put in place, obviously depending on each family's case. But we've had mediations, and now on Zoom, for example, it's a little bit easier because in terms of physical location, it doesn't really matter where they're at, as long as they feel they're safe and they can safely negotiate. That's the premise of it. That's the ideal situation, is you have families separately, and then it is encouraged, if there is a concern that your decision-making ability, your self-determination is going to be impacted negatively, so there is a power imbalance just by the mere fact of the context that you're under, then there is an expectation that you are not, you know, necessarily together. You are actually in different quarters, you know, hopefully outside of the same home. We've had families, yes, in different spaces of the home, of the same home, but if there is, you know, a lot of tension, we've had families who, even though they live under the same roof, we have a mechanism in place where we say, well, do you have anywhere else to go to conduct the mediation? So you can allow yourself a cool-off period, you know, so you can allow yourself room to breathe if something didn't go as expected or if something escalated, right? So we try and create those parameters where there is, you know, there is safety, there is an acknowledgement of the safety concerns that one party has or both parties have, and then have a way to still keep them out of court and negotiate a plan where both of those parties' self-determination is still not negatively impacted. So in a long-winded way, yes, the cases with these elements can be mediated, but they have to be mediated in a very specific way, with either legal advice and support on each sides, and also with you know, physical distance appropriately managed, and also put in place terms that is not going to impact, you know, their decision-making authority or property division, things like that, right? Because some families do fear that if they leave, and we have these questions all the time, if I leave the home, do I lose, you know, rights to the home, or do I lose rights to the children, or, you know, so there's that fear of misinformation. We deal with it right away, so that doesn't play an extra role into the next phase of negotiating a family plan.
I always forget, but I know that mediation is as much not just working together, but as well, you guys give the parties education and information and tools of communication as well. I always forget that. I mean, that's definitely something you don't get, right, going to court. Eva, do you have anything to add, like sort of a few final words?
Sure. You know, I think if maybe someone is researching mobility issues and they're nervous that, you know, they're stuck in their neighborhood in the GTA forever and they can't move, I think maybe one thing to take away is you can, you know, as long as you identify. I think the easiest thing to do is identify from the outset that the other parent's relationship with the children is important, and that even though you're going to move, you can demonstrate how you can still support that relationship. I think that's the crux of it all.
That sounds really, really good. And Laura, any final words?
I think Eva had the perfect final words, so how can I beat that?
Okay, Okay, so thank you so much, Laura and Eva, for sharing your insight with us once again. We hope that this video offers you some insight into how mediation works. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and click on the bell as well so you can be notified of our upcoming videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you the next time. Bye.